and Alice from Friends of Family Farmers. So we're going to do some introductions. And so Alice, if you want to go first and talk about Friends of Family Farmers, and then Ubaldo, you could talk about Columbia River Keepers and Comunidades of the program.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. My name is Alice Morrison. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-directors of Friends of Family Farmers. I am going to share my screen and show you a brief presentation on who we are as an organization and the work that we do. All right. Can everybody see that? Great. Yes. So yes, we are Friends of Family Farmers. As you can see on the screen, our mission advances policies and programs that protect, promote, and sustain resilient and economically viable community agricultural systems in Oregon. And what that feeds into is our vision. We envision a local and diversified, interconnected agricultural future built by small and mid-sized farms where people, animals, communities, and ecosystems thrive, and equitable policies improve lives and land for all Oregonians. We were founded in 2005 by a group of concerned small farmers and rural residents actually in the Scioto area in Lynn County. And we were formed because these folks didn't see themselves represented in the agricultural policy groups and commodity organizations that claim to represent all farmers across the state. The farmers that we represent are smaller, more diversified in their offerings. They are more interested in selling into the local and regional market. We don't really have a lot of folks in our network who are selling overseas or selling across the country. We represent the folks who are producing food and agricultural products, not just food, for their immediate community. And because those folks didn't have a voice in the system that creates agricultural policy, we were founded to be that voice. We have three main buckets that our programming falls into. The first being farmer programming, our direct technical assistance work to help farmers achieve their goals, run their businesses, and produce the products that they want to bring to their communities. We also have some programs that are catered towards eaters, those folks who are not farmers but care deeply about the community food system that we're creating together. And we hope to connect those folks with the producers in their area and give them opportunities to engage in the work of building the food system that they would like to live in. And our third program bucket is advocacy. That involves both legislation and agency/regulation work to make the system not only cater to the largest, most commodity-driven farms, but also to remove barriers and create opportunities for the farmers that we work with, and who we like to say are small and mid-sized, socially and ecologically responsible farmers. So our farmer programs, we have two perennial farmer programs. The first is the Oregon Pasture Network. This is a community of practice for pasture-based animal agriculturalists, folks raising any type of animal for meat or fiber, or to sell breeding stock on pasture, with a focus on sustainable production and regenerating our soils and pasture ecosystems while producing high quality, wonderful animal products to bring to their communities. Through the OPN, we have classes that can be attended by anyone, not just OPN members. And those classes are on any topic related to producing animals on pasture. We actually have a series of classes coming up. They include forage management, like summer forage management, so your pastures don't go brown during the summer. They include designing rotational grazing schemes, as well as predator control using livestock guardian dogs, and some other topics related to marketing your products and meat quality, how to talk to your customers about what a beautiful pastured product has above and beyond what you can get at the grocery store. For those of you who are not producers, we also, through the OPN at OregonPastureNetwork.org, you can visit our pastured product guide and find a local farmer to buy from. If you're looking, especially if you're looking for a half or quarter or whole animal, if you're looking to buy in bulk directly from the farmer, it's a great resource to check out. Our second perennial farmer program that we always have available is Oregon FarmLink. Oregon FarmLink is a land linking site where people seeking farmland and folks holding farmland across Oregon can connect to find the next land steward of their farmland to keep it in production, maintain their values of stewardship, and ensure that the next generation of farmers has land security in Oregon. In addition to the listing site that we host at OregonFarmLink.org, we also have one-on-one technical assistance available. We have our Navigate program where you can apply and be accepted to work with one of our navigators to develop an individualized one-on-one land plan. And that also comes with some access to subsidized legal advice for a lease you might be writing, resources around due diligence, like how to evaluate the land to make sure it fits your goals. And we do have Sylvia Cuesta, I think, is here tonight, and she is our BIPOC navigator, providing some culturally specific and BIPOC oriented farmer assistance for folks seeking land who identify as a BIPOC farmer here in Oregon. We also will shortly be opening up applications for our South Willamette Valley Navigate cohort. So if you are looking for land, I think between Salem and Roseburg is the parameters. Keep an eye out. We're opening that soon. We're very excited. Here's some pictures from some of the farms that we work with. We do work with crop farmers, as well as our pastured folks. This is actually a picture from one of our Oregon Pasture Network events. We do pasture walks and folks gather to learn from each other in addition to learning from experts and scientists. Here are some cows from Nehalem River Ranch, one of our OPN members out on the coast. Our eater programs, you are at one of them. I guess this is both an advocacy program and an eater program, but our main eater program right now is our Information series. where we gather farmers and farm advocates together to engage directly with members of the public who want to know more about what they're facing and what's going on in the world of community food systems. We have an information coming up on Thursday night, and that is going to be a showcase of coalition legislative priorities. We have had 2 informations in this series, one in November, one in December, about our legislative priorities. I'm sure Brittany can put those links in the chat for folks to check out. But on Thursday, you'll be hearing from all of our, not all of our, but some of our main coalition partners about some of the legislation we're working on together as a community to, like I said, tear down barriers and create opportunities for folks across the spectrum of community food systems. And back when we did informations in person, this is what they looked like. We would meet in community gathering spaces and have farmers talk about their production and what they stand for. We hope to someday return to in-person programming like this. We also work on advocacy. You can see on the screen some of the victories that we've had in terms of creating policy that makes it easier to be a small farmer in Oregon. We were instrumental in passing the Farm Direct Law. We also helped to pass the 1,000-bird exemption. Both of those laws allow small producers to bring their product to market more easily. We helped to create the Small Farms seat on the Board of Agriculture, which is an advisory board for the Department of Agriculture at the state. In 2021, we secured a $2 million grant fund from the state for small scale meat processing infrastructure to help folks alleviate that bottleneck and, again, find more ways for small farmers to bring their products to market. We helped to block the renewal of the bovine manure tax credit, which was a greenwash tax credit that would majority have gone to the largest dairy in the state to support the false promise of methane digesters as a climate solution. We also were one of the first and loudest agricultural groups in PECUN's Coalition for Farm Worker Overtime earlier this, it's not 2022 anymore. Last year in the short session in 2022, and we were very excited to be part of that group that pushed for more equitable working conditions in the agricultural sector. So this is our a picture of one of our rallies at the Capitol. We used to have these every 2 years. This area at the Capitol is closed for construction this year. So we will be having a rally in Eugene at the new Lane County Farmers Market Pavilion on March 5th. So look out for info on that. And yeah, we are so glad that you're here tonight. And I think I have talked enough. So I am going to pass it off to Ubaldo to talk to you about Comunidades and Columbia Riverkeeper and Radio Tierra and all of the projects that he works on.
Thank you. My name is Ubaldo Hernandez. I work for Columbia Riverkeeper as a community organizer. And Columbia Riverkeeper is an organization that our mission is to protect and restore the water quality of the Columbia River and all life connected to it, from the headwaters to the Pacific Ocean. So this is an organization that we have a big task to protecting the Columbia River. And we work with many organizations along the river to advocate for a clean river and a healthy water for our communities. And this is one of the examples being here, participating with you guys in coalition with these other organizations. So also, I work for Comunidades as a director of this project of Latino lead organization of the Gorge. We are the first Latino lead organization on this area. And our work or mission is to advocate, amplify voices for environmental and social justice. One of the things that we see on our work as an environmental organization with Columbia Riverkeeper and Comunidades is that we need to engage our Latino community to participate and advocating for social environmental justice. But we cannot forget about the needs of the Latino community or immigrant communities on this country. Our communities are willing and eager to participate, but also our communities have issues that they need to work with. Social justice is one of the main issues. Healthcare access, housing, all these problems our families need to go through. And one of the things, especially in Oregon, racism, discrimination. We know that Oregon is one of the hubs for white supremacy groups. So we need to work with our communities and think about these Latino communities being part of the environmental movement, but also knowledge that they have another issue, social justice issues that they need to work with. And so for me, working with Columbia Riverkeeper, being with Comunidades is a big opportunity to amplify these voices and give access to our community in spaces where we were never invited before, like environmental advocacy. I think this is early stages of this involvement with immigrant Latino community. This is something kind of new for our communities to participate. Not that we are not environmentalists before. I think big part of our culture and our communities is environmental protection, the love of the Mother Earth. But we haven't had a space on the advocacy to express our concerns and or support to protecting our natural resources. So for me, working for Columbia Riverkeeper and Comunidades is a really important work, and collaborating with organizations like Friends of how you say it, Friends of Family Farmers.
Yeah.
It's a great honor, and I really enjoy being here and listening to Alice, all the work you guys do, and for us be part of this support group and be part of this coalition and network with you guys, and ready to share some experiences on advocacy.
Great, thank you. So before we get into kind of the details of structuring your story and how to engage with the media, can you just give a quick, Alice and Ubaldo, talk a little bit about why we're here and why this is important to engage with the media and how to engage with the media, and then we can get into the details of the lessons of how to and some examples.
Sure. So Ubaldo and FoFF, Ubaldo's organization and my organization, not just him and I, work together in the Stand Up to Factory Farms Coalition. And when we are talking about the impact of factory farms on our communities and food systems, just to use that issue as a example of a campaign, I know that the small farmer viewpoint and the folks that most often interact with FoFF, we get a lot of media inquiries where folks want to have that perfect soundbite or have that like pre-packaged view of how all small farmers view a topic. And working with the media can be very, very instrumental to moving progress forward, but it can also be a really difficult and tokenizing process, especially if you're intimidated by it or have never done it before, or don't have the support of an organization like ours or Ubaldo's behind you to help you prepare for those kinds of opportunities. So we get a lot of media inquiries where folks want us to connect them with a farmer who feels a certain way about a certain topic. But my goal tonight is to help everybody on the call be more equipped to really get their individual story across, and also have what you need to connect it to the larger movement and make your point heard and get beyond the soundbite that maybe the reporter is looking for when they reach out. And also, we might talk about later using media opportunities to your advantage if there's something that you want to change. Ubaldo, how does that compare to your experience in your community?
Thank you, Alice. I think everything you said, and I totally agree with that. And also having in mind that telling the story is really important, and it's really important for people participating in this forum, because most of the people participating here, I'm assuming a lot of you guys are community organizers, social activists. And one of the things when I talk to people that they are social activists, they are community organizers, we are the storytellers for our communities, because it is really hard for a person to stand in front of a microphone or stand in front of a crowd of people and tell the story. It's not that easy, and also it's not easy to tell stories. But for us as a community organizers, for advocates, we are the people that will help transfer the information, to share the information to who has to hear that story. And for us, it's really important to learn how to bring the information to the public or to the leaders that need to hear those. So that's why we are here, to learn the importance of storytelling and how we can make those stories work well for sharing the concerns and feels of our communities.
Before we move forward, can you explain and give details of examples of what we are talking about when opportunities to engage with the media?
One of the things that I see this is that a lot of times when we have in a public forum, when we are talking to either the media, or we are talking to city council, county commissioners, and we are trying to talk to some representatives from the DEQ and all these organizations that we constantly have meetings with, and we bring people from the community to tell the story. I think this is places and groups that we can use these stories. And this is one of the main reasons to have a well-organized story that will reach out to these people and help us to make the changes that we need to create for our communities. Alice, I don't know if you want to add on that.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it, because a lot of times when these issues are being reported on out in to the media, the first place they look is those the testimonies or speaking to your representative, and they take sound bites from there, or find folks who testified to reach out to and say, hey, I want to do an interview with you. And so, I mean, it can be your testimony, that's public record, like what Ubaldo was saying, that is a public forum. So those words and having your story really clear and well organized will help your point never be misconstrued, no matter which outlet displays it. We do get some direct media inquiries from newspapers and radio. And I know Ubaldo has a podcast as well, and you can tell longer form stories there sometimes, but sometimes in in those media outlets, like we work a lot with the Capitol Chronicle, who reports on legislation, or the Capitol Press, which is an agricultural publication. Sometimes they just want one sentence. So it really varies with media outlets how much they are interested in using. And then there's self-directed media, which we will talk about later, but that's when you are kind of shopping your story around as a piece of media in itself. Like maybe you are submitting an opinion piece or letter to the editor to a newspaper or magazine, or you are, writing a guest post on FoFF's blog or Columbia Riverkeeper's blog or Comunidades' blog. I don't know if you all have a blog. We don't use our blog as much as we should, and maybe we should use it more. But those kinds of things, or maybe you're a farmer and you're writing a piece for your website to explain to your customer base what you think of an issue, or you're asking your customer base to get involved for the sake of protecting your ability to bring them food in the community. So yeah, I think all of those opportunities to be in the public forum and to engage in public discourse, the storytelling points that we're about to start talking about are really important.
Great. I think it's time now to kind of get into the details then. Now we know the outlet of this information and where it's going. What's the most important pieces to this puzzle? Ubaldo, do you want to talk about storytelling and why, what part of the stories are important to put out there?
Yes, one of the things that when we think about storytelling, we need to think about who we want to reach. And a lot of times we need to have in mind that, for example, we talk about telling our story to elected representatives or some government officials or in some forum, right? But also, a lot of times we want to tell the story to get support from members of our community, for our neighbors to hear the story and support our movement. And so that's why it's important to think about these people, these communities that we want to reach out, and for that story to bring the most important of the story. A lot of times people don't want to look like they are the I say the weak link on the chain. But sometimes we have to recognize that we are on the stage, and it's okay to tell the story. It's okay to be vulnerable, and that way that will help us also to tell the story that with more be more effective when we tell the story. Like a story that came from our heart, that for something that we are feeling, because I think most of the time our stories, when are told by our people, or we collect those stories from people, we need to make sure that we maintain those painful sides of those stories and project those to the people that we want to reach out.
Yeah, and just to jump in here to kind of build on your point of knowing who you're talking to. And when you have that really deeply vulnerable or personal story, knowing how to frame that so that folks can absorb it, when you are talking to a legislator, for example, it might be more important to incorporate some other data or wider world example to mirror your story and say like, hey, to go back to the factory farm example, like the lower Umatilla groundwater management, lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area, the Lagwama, is currently having a water crisis in part because of the runoff from a mega dairy. And if I know Ubaldo works with a lot of folks in that community, and we work with folks in that community through our Stand Up to Factory Farms Coalition work. And folks are talking about the impact it has on their daily life. Maybe they are experiencing some of the health problems that come from drinking contaminated water. Maybe they're dealing with the emotional and mental impact of having to work in factory farms and experience that kind of animal cruelty and environmental degradation firsthand. But you can say all that and then give a little bit of context for, you know, the data that we have on that area and how it compares to other places in Oregon. And that can be really impactful for a legislator. But I will say, when you're talking to a legislator, you usually have the ability to submit written testimony in addition. So don't feel like you have to go really deep into facts or figures. You can give a couple of key ones and submit more in your written testimony. But if you were talking to your neighbors or other community members that you wanted to get involved in the campaign, really thinking about how you connected the dots for yourself with your health problems and the water that you're drinking and how that's impacting you. Or, you know, if you're a farmer who's being driven out of business because of climate impacts or water quality degradation or all these kinds of things, like really connecting the dots between different parts of your personal story on a day-to-day basis can be really effective in building community around it. And I know that it's hard because people don't, especially myself and other farmers across the state, I hear all the time, people are like, I'm not an expert. I don't know all this. I maybe don't have like water testing numbers from everything all over the place. But you know when your yields have gone down year over year. And you know when the erosion from flash floods in your water table or in your watershed is carving out the bank of your riparian area. And you know that hailstorm that was super unlike a regular April has taken out part of your crop. And talking about your individual experience and how it has built over time in your life can be just as effective as talking about like all the data in the world when we're talking about creating an impact. So yeah. Brittany, I feel like I may have gotten a little far off track. You want to reel me back in?
No, you're good. Ubaldo, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. Sorry, I thought my internet is really scattered, and I'm gonna get a little bit cuts, but I'll try to make to work this out. So yeah, one of the things that I found is that it's really important for us as advocates, community organizers, to listen to people that they're telling us their story. One of the things for me as a community organizer, when I've been working in Morrow County and talking to different members of the community on their issues about water contamination, it's really important to listen to those stories, and you'll see there is a lot of similarity with other stories. People are suffering the same from the same issue, they have the same experiences, and you can really with that you can really see how all those different stories, different voices can tell one story, and you can use different parts of people's stories to make one, you know, to represent the story of the community. And you can bring few examples, specific examples from some families, but you can make with all those members of the community that you talk to them, you can make one whole story, and from that you can pick and choose what's personal samples you can bring to the story, and to make it more impactful to the community. And also, like Brittany was talking about, that there is another type of storytelling, and this is when you are giving testimonials, right? Because that's a storytelling too. And then you have to pick and choose the most important aspects of the story to create an impact, because at that time you have 2 minutes, 3 minutes to tell the story. It's not the same as when you go and talk to members of the community on a forum. Like right now, we have an hour and a half, right, to talk about this, and we can expand and tell a lot of things with detail. But when you are in front of on a panel, you have 2-3 minutes, and you have to tell the story. You have to come out with that story that you've been collecting and put it down in 3 minutes. So that, yeah, you have to pick up the most important words, what is more impactful for the community. And but also that takes practice, it's time also. And I suggest when you are going to do a testimonial and you have 3 minutes, ask somebody, a coworker, a neighbor, and practice what you're gonna say, because that practice will help you to concentrate your thoughts, and will help you to not get lost on your and your story, because that's really easy when you are new. We're gonna give a testimonial, and you start talking about a topic, and then you see that topic takes you to another issue that you think it will take me a second. I'll use it as a reference, but no, sometimes it goes far and far, and then you are going farther, and it's really hard to come back to close your thoughts on those 3 minutes. So practice with your friends, practice with a coworker is really important, so you can tell that story in 3 minutes. And also, it's really important to practice when you are doing a presentation or talking to more people for a longer time, because a lot of times you might have a lot of things to say, but you don't know how, and then you get short on your ideas. And then you have like, oh yeah, I was supposed to talk for 10 minutes, and now in 5 minutes I'm done. So, and this is one of the other side of telling a story. You know, sometimes you don't have enough time, and then sometimes you have too much time, and you need to know how to use the time, what stories, how to expand your story, you know.
Yeah, and I think that thoughtfulness and taking the time to practice and develop what you are wanting to say works. It also works for conversations with like newspaper or radio folks. I know that when we get media inquiries at FoFF, I very rarely am game to say like, yes, let's do a live interview right now. You don't have to do that. If somebody asks you to do that, it's completely within the norms, and it's not rude at all for you to say, hey, I need time to think about this. I want to make sure I cover everything. Can you please send me a list of questions to this email address or text it to me? And we'll do this, I don't know, tomorrow at 9 a.m. or whatever time and date works for them. And, you know, if you have to make up an excuse, say, hey, I got to go do something else. If they push you, it doesn't matter. You can say no and say, I want to think about it and I want to wait. and they're approaching you because you have a certain experience or a certain identity that they want to have represented in their story. And if they're a responsible reporter, they're not approaching you within 24 hours of their deadline, but they might be approaching you within 48 or 72 hours of their deadline. So be aware of that. But you can always say, thank you so much. I'm very interested in talking to you about this. I want to make sure I get you all the information that you need. Could you please send me a list of questions you're thinking about in writing? And then I'll get back to you, or we can talk at X time. That's completely within the norms, and I encourage you to do that. That also gives you an opportunity to, like Ubaldo said, go to your community, and whether it's your family or your neighborhood or anyone else who's been impacted by whatever issue they've asked you to speak about, you can gather more than just your perspective on that. If you haven't had the chance to, sit down with your mom or your sister or what have you and ask them, like, how did this impact you? I think one thing I want to talk about briefly is that sometimes there is a question when you're, giving an interview about why you are qualified to speak on that topic and building credibility. And obviously the media outlet came to you because you have some kind of lived experience that lines up with the topic. But often it is not just your story to tell, obviously, and you want to acknowledge your association with it. But sometimes when you are brought an opportunity to talk about something that's like very personal or very impactful, or we talk about this with environmental justice quite a bit, because sometimes the health impacts of environmental disasters can make people, unable to tell their stories physically. So if you're not the person who was directly impacted, or if someone in your life comes to you and says, hey, I was asked to tell this story and I really don't think that I can, it's okay to take that interview and to tell that person how it impacted you as a family member, friend, neighbor of this person, and then also disclose whatever details that person gave to you to tell the reporter. So I think that that's something that people in the farmer community often, I got that a lot. Like when we had the advocacy workshop prior to this one about talking to your legislator, I had someone ask me, well, if my farm, we still have water at the end of the season and our water right is older, and so we didn't experience that problem directly, is it still okay for me to talk to my legislator about the lack of water in my basin and tell them how other people were impacted? And I want to say that, like, as long as you're clear about who you are and how you play into the story, and I would never advocate for anybody to take on lived experience that's not theirs, but as long as you're clear and you have, the trust of the other people whose story you're telling, you can absolutely tell other people's stories in conjunction with yours as a community impact, like Ubaldo was saying earlier.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would like to tell a different perspective on that from the farm working community, right? When sometimes we cannot tell the story of somebody, but also this is one of the things that we encountered when we were talking about overtime pay for farm workers, right? We got at this meeting in Hayden Hood River, where some of the local organizers, local leaders from other organizations that were wanted to hear specifically from the farm working community. They want to hear from the farm workers. And one other thing is, for us, it is important to hear from the farm workers, but also farm workers are not the only one people affected by not having overtime pay. We can, one of the things that we were talking about is their families can talk about it too. They can advocate because the wife has to deal with those lack of money, right? How you administrate the money that you get if you don't get enough money, you don't get paid enough money for the work you do. How their kids are affected by it, right? So yeah, you don't have to tell the story from the farm worker perspective, but you can tell the story from the kid of a farm worker, from the spouse of the farm worker, right? From the friend of the farm worker, because a lot of times all these stories are affecting us, not directly, but indirectly. We are part of this community and we have that right to also tell the story. Because when we just focus on the farm working, we'll have to tell the story. It's not the whole story, you know, because one issue that affect our community affect an issue that affect one part of our community affect the whole community. And the same thing happened for people that are affected in Morrow County because of the water contamination. You might not be affected by it personally, but probably your family is affected by it. Probably your neighbor is affected by it. And you can tell also the story to help advocate for the community that are more like a direct impact by these problems, these issues.
Definitely. I think something that we talked about in preparation for this workshop was a kind of a sample story structure that, you know, we find is common throughout the effective stories that we've seen throughout the campaigns that we've all worked on. And I just wanted to lay that out quickly. And this is also something that's in one of our handouts that we're going to send out after this. But the story structure that we kind of the commonalities that we see is first, like setting the scene and introducing the community. Where is this happening? What is this a story about a town? Is this a story about a farm? Is this a story about a family? And then talking about the problem as it affects that setting, health impacts, economic impacts, environmental degradation, and then identifying the source of that problem. So you introduce the setting, introduce the problem, identify the source of the problem, and then you go back to that family or town or what have you, and now they are a case study. And you talk about how this is bigger than them and this is a community problem. And that's where, you know, it might be important to include your like one specific statistic. And then once you've introduced the setting, you've introduced the person, the family, the town, and their problem, and then showed the source of the problem, talked about how it's impacted the wider community, then you present a solution, whether it's vote for this bill or sign this petition or talk to your legislator or what have you. And something that you want to emphasize when you're talking about the solution is that we don't necessarily want to provide closure in these stories, because one bill or one law is the beginning of a solution. It's what we can do right now, but it's not the end all be all solution to the problem.
Ubaldo, do you want to take an example, like a real life example, like mega dairies, and kind of walk folks through what that would look like with a specific example with like what you work on with mega dairies?
Yeah, I can. I'm just thinking about the story I heard from a family that was affected by mega dairies by water contamination. And one of the things I was talking to this woman from Yakima, and she was telling me that they were having problems with water on her mother's property. And the way she was telling me that story is that one of the issues started because she was getting sick for a long time. They were going to the doctors, trying to find out the problems that she had with all these symptoms, headaches, tiredness, start developing asthma, and they couldn't find any issues the cause of these problems. And they were visiting the different doctors till somebody suggests them to test the quality of the water on their property. And they did a test on the doubt that there was a lot of contamination from a mega dairy that was close by, that they was depositing close to their property. They have a place where they were disposing all the carcasses from cows and things that animals that die on this farm, and they were putting this close to these different properties, and they contaminate for that reason they contaminate the groundwater, and families were getting affected by it. And but it took a long time, and people didn't know where they were, why they were getting sick, and they didn't know what's happening until they did a test on the different how you call water wells. You know, when people make they extract water from underground, and then that way a lot of people start testing their water, and they found out that the water was contaminated too, and they started talking about each other and found out that they were dealing with the same symptoms for a long time, not knowing that place was their water was contaminated. So this is one of the examples that I think is really close to what we're talking about, that when you told your story to somebody else and see what you found, other people will go and do the same thing, like go and taste the water, see that they were dealing with the same symptoms, and then they start finding the problem, and for that they start looking for a solution to their problem, and because of that they were able to start getting a big part of the community to start demanding proper cleanup of the area and restore the water quality, good quality on the water from the area. I think I got lost. I've seen everybody's.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of, walking people through the problem and then connecting it to the bigger community. And that is one of those things that we talked about, knowing your audience. And I think that particular story is really, really good for, both convincing decision makers that water contamination should be taken more seriously, but also that's a really good example of how you could bring other community members along. Because if they had a similar experience and they're somewhere else in the process, maybe they haven't gotten through, doing all of the testing or what have you. And they're like, and they see the parallels with how that's playing out in their life. And I think that that's something that is really important for movement building. And that's a main function of storytelling.
We have a question in the chat box right now. When telling your story, is it important to ask for something at the end? What if you don't know what to ask for?
Yeah, that can be really hard. Because sometimes you're talking about big problems that don't seem to have a clean solution. I think it is important to have some kind of ask at the end. It doesn't need to be, during the legislative session, it's fairly easy to pinpoint like, oh, I just need to pass this bill and things might get better, or that will be the first step in addressing this problem. So asking folks to contact their legislator on a certain issue, actually, not even just during the legislative session. Like, you can ask folks to contact their legislator because of an issue, regardless of when the legislature is in session. So there can be a certain bill or petition to ask people to take action on. And organizations like FoFF or like Comunidades or Columbia River Keeper can help point you in the direction of currently available, solutions that we're putting forward that we hope will work. But also there's a couple of defaults. Like, I think that all you really need to know is who has the power over the issue that you're talking about. And so if it's a state issue, asking folks to tell their legislator to take up the problem. If it's a city or municipality-based issue, asking folks to contact their city councilor to take up the problem. If they don't have a policy solution already, you can pressure them into creating one that you can then hopefully hone. Ubaldo, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. But also when you're telling your story, and yes, it's important to ask people to do something. And a lot of times you might tell your story because you are participating with an organization that has a bill, right? We can that person that's listening to a story to take an action, which is really important, because when people listen or when people go to places like these forums or go to a forum to listen about water contamination or by nitrates or air quality, people wants to do something. Once they learn the problem, they're looking to do something and they want to do something. And one other thing is, like, a lot of times you talk about these issues when there is a petition, there is something negotiating with your local representatives. And you can direct people to say, hey, sign this petition. Or if there is no action yet, you can still people to ask them to call a local representative and tell them, we need to demand justice. You can call them and tell them, I heard about this story and I want, there is nothing, a petition yet, but it's really good for people to know that they can do something. They can take an action or experience that empower our community, because it's really frustrating a lot of times when you see people gathering and they go to meeting after meeting, but there is nothing to do. There is no action. And to us, it's not necessary to have a petition, but you can still call your representative and tell them about the story you heard, and then you want them to do something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that something that came up for me while Ubaldo was talking is like, you really, if there's nothing that you can think of, like that is known to do to take action on that, demanding from elected officials what they're going to do is more effective than going to a, say, an agency like DEQ or something and asking them what they're going to do. Unfortunately, because of the electoral system, elected officials are much more likely to take up a controversial issue than an agency. So if there's something that you're, like, I wish it didn't work that way. I wish that people would just, take up an issue no matter the controversy if it was hurting people. But if there's something wrong, it's often easier to start with elected officials than going through an agency because they have electoral pressure. And often you are a voter in their district. And that is also more effective. I will say that I started as a community organizer years ago for another organization. And we did a lot of like corporate pressure campaigns. Those are not as effective in my experience. It's really hard to target a private corporation or a private individual rather than targeting your elected official. And sometimes you will get more personal blowback from targeting those types of private entities. Not to say that you shouldn't. And especially when you have a movement behind you, you should absolutely hold people and corporations accountable for their bad actions. But when you're talking to the media as a person, as a private person, or writing a letter to the editor, for example, it is more likely to gain a positive response if you are directing people to make systemic change instead of going after one person or corporation. Something to think about.
Yeah, that might be a good way to segue to letters to the editors. I know, Alice, you did a worksheet that we could share with.
Yeah, mention is about that if you are a voter, you can call them and ask them to do something. And then I was thinking about the work we do and the immigrant community, which a lot of the immigrant community, they're not citizens, they're residents. And
Ubaldo, you're getting a little choppy. Maybe you can turn your video off.
And they don't have the right to vote. Yeah, okay, let's see if that works better. So one of the things that I was thinking about is that when we try to engage our immigrant community, a lot of the immigrant community, they are not citizens, they can't vote, but we can work with this community to encourage them to call the local representatives to ask to take action in order to protect their community. This is one of the things that we can do and everybody can do. Everybody has the right to call a local representative and demand to do things for the community. Make sure that we don't get that confused with people that you can vote, because that's only for citizens. But as a resident of a community, you can call your local representatives, you can call your senators, the county commissioners, the city commissioners, city council members. You can even send letters to the president as a resident, but you cannot vote. And this is one of the things, especially when we are organizers, we are organizations that we want to engage our immigrant community to participate with us. We have to make sure that we understand how this community can participate with us, and be really careful, because if we tell them, oh yeah, you can vote, and always talk about, oh, this is for the voting community, we can exclude them. And also we can send out a wrong message and encourage people to vote when they shouldn't. So our message also has to be really careful when we talk to the immigrant community, and make sure that our community understand the different roles that you can play as an immigrant. And you can still call and talk to your local representatives and demand justice, and demand for your local representatives to advocate for the community.
Definitely. Thank you for clarifying that, Ubaldo. And like, yes, everybody definitely has the right to advocate for their community, no matter your voting status. And I think, yeah, being clear about that, and also, engaging with the media is for every part of the community, and you're a community member, and your lived experience in that community holds the same, no matter if you are a voter or are not a voter. So yeah, all of the tips we've given tonight definitely bridge that gap, and thank you for making that distinction and correcting me on that.
Yeah, and everybody has a story to tell, and that's important also to collect those stories, because a lot of times we see a lot of undocumented workers, residents, that they don't want to speak up because either they have no documentation, or they don't want to put their working permits in jeopardy, right? Because if they said, oh, if I say something, I might lose my residency, right? Or the other way, an undocumented worker might not want to say anything because they're going to be afraid to be deported, but there is opportunities for people to tell the stories, and it's safe to do it.
Definitely. And it creates community pressure for those elected officials. It still creates that community pressure and urges them to take action.
Exactly.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to add that to the chat and we can go over those. Otherwise, we can talk about letters to the editor, and we have a worksheet that Alice put together that I'll put in the chat box for everyone to look over. And maybe Alice, you can go over what you think is important to include to a letter to the editor.
Yeah. So letters to the editor are one of the lowest barrier ways to engage with the media. You don't have to go out and find a reporter. You don't have to take advantage of a certain opportunity. These are things that you can always do, pretty much. And a letter to the editor, sometimes called an opinion piece, can sometimes be interchangeably used with op-eds or guest columns. Sometimes those are different, though. Check the rules at your local paper. These are things that are part of newspaper publications, and they are still the #1 section read on all newspaper publications. It's like letters to the editor and sports are the top sections that people read, even if it's not in print. If it's a digital paper, people really want to know how policies and conditions impact the people in their communities. So this is a great way to, educate the public on your topic. Maybe a lot of agricultural things are considered niche issues because not a lot of people participate in the agricultural sector of our world anymore. So a lot of people feel fairly far removed from it and feel like they don't understand it. So letters to the editor can be a great way to educate people on an issue that you're facing as a farmer, as a farm worker, as part of those communities. You can also show the impact of an issue on a specific portion of your community. You can urge folks to take action that's available directly to them, like voting on a ballot measure or you know, pressuring a certain legislator, talking to somebody in a decision-making position to make change. And something to remember about letters to the editor is that if folks can go through on the worksheet, we went over why you should write an LTE, where you should submit your LTE. The most effective that you can be is in your local paper. So wherever you live and you're part of the community is where you should focus. It is great to get into a statewide publication like the Oregonian. There is much more competition for that space in those larger papers. And if it's a very localized issue, you might be less likely to be published than you would at a smaller paper. And in addition, smaller papers that have a more localized distribution area, like just your town or your, well, not just your town, there are so few papers these days, it's more like counties. But if it's something that's distributed to your county, it's more likely to be taken up by municipal or county officials as something to talk about, because they know that that impact is there in their community and not just vaguely across the state. So like the story structure that we talked about before, how I recommend folks approach their LTE is that they answer this series of questions. Who are you? Where do you live? What do you do with your time? How do you identify in your community? What's your part? What's your life like? How has the issue you're writing about impacted your life personally? What's the impact of on your community? And how does that connect to the larger picture? Then what is the solution? Who can enact the solution? How can folks get involved? And where can people go for more info? If you answer all of those questions in your LTE, you will have walked people through the issue pretty effectively. Please be wary though, because a lot of letters to the editor have very short word counts. Like some of them are like 250 words. So you can only spend a sentence or two on each of these. So the tips that I give at the bottom of the worksheet are definitely pay attention to word limits, because if you submit something to your paper and it's over the word limit, they probably won't even send you a rejection letter. They just won't print it. So you really have to make sure you're following the word limit for that paper. They'll be really clear about it too. Know your audience and speak to them directly. So if you are talking, if you're in an agricultural community and you know that your paper covers a lot of agricultural topics, try to loop in an article that they had about a similar topic earlier that week or month. But at the same time, don't use jargon or too much technical language. You want everyone to know what you're talking about. So that is kind of my overview of LTEs. And I wanted to share an example of an LTE that was published in the Bend Source Weekly. And yes, good point, Yvonne. The letter to the editor worksheet will be available in Spanish with the follow-up for this workshop. And yeah, so Brittany just put a link in the chat to the Ben Source Weekly with an LTE that was published from a farmer that we work with talking about water issues. And Megan from Boundless Farmstead submitted this piece. She wrote an entire guest opinion on water laws in Oregon. And so if you, actually, I'm just going to share my screen. So you see here, it's in the letters to the editor section, the guest opinion. And you see she identifies herself and talks about her experience and how she fits into the community. Then she lays out the problem about not having enough water, and she only got 60% of her water allotment based on her water right. Then she lays out the bigger picture on how beneficial use is categorized and how the system has enabled this problem that's impacting her personally. And then she lays out a solution that is, you know, in this case, it's not a specific ask of vote yes or no on this law, but it is a call to action to start a community conversation about redefining beneficial use. And then she lists where you can find more information. The full letter is on her farm's blog, and you can continue the conversation there. So this is a good example of, you know, how you can advocate for yourself and start conversations within your community using the media with that formula that we laid out.
I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but anybody, if you'd like to unmute yourself, feel free to ask any questions of Ubaldo and Alice. This is your time. I am going to be sending a follow-up email with all the information and resources that we shared tonight. Any questions? Looks like both of you are very clear tonight, so there's no questions. But if you have any questions, feel free. If something comes up for you tomorrow or this week or even next month, Ubaldo at Columbia Riverkeeper and Alice or myself, I'm Brittany, the Community Engagement Manager at Friends of Family Farmers. So we're happy to help. We're happy to walk you through any of this process. We're going to be asking both organizations, I'm sure, will be asking for you to step up in the coming months to speak your story and share your experience with legislators, written testimony, talking with your legislators, and possibly engaging with the media. So we're here to help you any step of the process. So please feel free to reach out. And I hope that you've watched all three workshops. This last 3 months have been extremely informative. We had giving testimony last month. In November, we did speaking with your legislators. And so those all have recordings that you can watch if you've missed them. They'll come in handy in this next coming months when we actually have some bills that we need to move forward. I'm sure Columbia Riverkeeper will have some needs as well. So please feel free to reach out whenever you need. And we really appreciate you being here. We do have a information on Thursday that we're going to be sharing with our coalition partners and what we're working on with them. So we hope you can make that. But thank you so much for joining us. This is really important work, and the bigger collective voice we have, the more impact we're going to make. So stay in touch, and you'll definitely be hearing from us. And thank you, Ubaldo, for joining us tonight. Thanks, Yvonne, for doing the Spanish translation. We really appreciate it. And we hope to stay in touch with you. Have a good night, everybody. Yvonne, I'll reach out. We'll be in touch.